The first explosion lit up the dark side of Zilara Prime like a dying star. Elder Thane pressed his thin fingers against the observation window of the orbital station and watched another civilian transport burst into flames below. The Vorthak warships moved through space like metal sharks, their weapons cutting through Zalarian defenses as if they were made of paper. "How many more ships have we lost?" Thane asked, without turning around. Council member Velnara checked her datapad with shaking hands. 17 civilian transports in the last hour. 3 more defense platforms. The Vorthak are not taking prisoners. Thane closed his eyes. In his 200 years of life, he had never seen such destruction. The Zalarian people were scholars and artists, not warriors. Their ships carried libraries and museums, not weapons. They had always believed that knowledge and wisdom could solve any conflict. The Vorthak Empire had proven them wrong in the most violent way possible. "The evacuation ships?" Thane asked. "Destroyed as they tried to leave the system. Overlord Krextar sent a message saying any ship that moves will be considered a military target." Velnara's voice broke. "He wants us to watch our people die before he comes for us." Another flash of light marked the death of more innocents. The Vorthak fleet had arrived 3 days ago, with demands that made no sense. They wanted the Zalarians to surrender their entire system, their research, their history, everything. When the Council asked for time to consider, the Vorthak had started killing civilians. "What about the other systems? Can anyone help us?" a younger council member asked. Velnara shook her head. "The Andromedan Confederation is too far away. The Spiral Alliance says they cannot risk war with the Vorthak Empire. Everyone is afraid." Thane opened his ancient eyes and looked at the burning world below. His people were dying, while the galaxy watched and did nothing. But there was one option they had not discussed. One possibility that made even him afraid. "There is one more choice," he said quietly. The council chamber fell silent except for the distant rumble of explosions. Every Zalarian knew what he meant, but no one wanted to say it out loud. "You cannot be serious," Velnara whispered. "The humans? Thane? Those are just stories. Old tales to frighten children." "Are they?" Thane turned to face the council. "My grandfather told me about the Keth Moran system, how the slave traders controlled everything until the human ships arrived. The slavers fled before the humans even powered their weapons." "Stories," another council member said. "Legends. Humans are just another species, nothing special." Thane walked to the center of the chamber. Outside, more ships died in flashes of white light. "My grandfather was there." Velnara. "He was a young merchant captain when the slavers took him. He spent 3 years in their cargo holds with hundreds of other beings from dozens of worlds. He watched good people die every day." The elder's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Then the human fleet arrived. Not the largest fleet anyone had ever seen. Not the most advanced ships. But when those gray hulls dropped out of hyperspace, the slavers panicked. They abandoned their stations, their prisoner ships, everything. They ran because they knew what humans do to beings who hurt innocents." "What do they do?" the young council member asked. "They make war so terrible that their enemies would rather die than fight them," Thane said. "But they only fight those who choose evil. They protect those who cannot protect themselves." Velnara stood up. "Even if the stories are true, how do we contact them? Human space is weeks away, and our communications array is damaged." "The emergency quantum beacon in the deep archives," Thane said. "It can reach any point in the galaxy instantly. That beacon is for the most desperate situations only. Using it means we admit we have no hope left." Thane looked out the window again. Another transport died in nuclear fire. Families were screaming on the communication channels as Vorthok fighters hunted them through space like animals. "Look around you, Velnara. Do we have any hope left?" The council voted in silence, each member pressing their hand to a glowing panel. When the votes were counted, The decision was unanimous. Send the message to human space and pray the stories were true. Thane himself went down to the deep archives while Vorthak bombs fell on the city above. The quantum beacon was an ancient device, built before most species had left their homeworlds. It could send a message across the galaxy in seconds, but using it would also tell the Vorthak that the Zilarians were calling for help. "Attention, Human Fleet Command," Thane spoke into the beacon as explosions shook the building. "This is Elder Thane of the Zilarian Council. Our people are under attack by the Vorthak Empire. We have no weapons, no defenses, no way to protect our children. If the stories are true, if humans truly protect the innocent, please help us. We have nothing to offer but our gratitude and the knowledge that good still exists in this galaxy." He sent the message and waited. Above him, the city burned. In space, the Vorthak fleet moved closer to the orbital stations where millions of Zilarians waited to die. But somewhere in human space, people were hearing his words. 3 hours later, the Vorthak intercepted a response. Overlord Krex Tar himself listened to the message and laughed when it ended. "The humans are coming," he announced to his bridge crew. 30 ships, they say. 30 little human ships to save the Zilarians." His officers laughed with him, but the laughter died quickly when their intelligence officer spoke up. "Sir, I should mention that we have reports about human military actions from other systems. The data suggests—" "I don't care what the data suggests," Krex Tar snarled. "Humans are weak mammals who think they can scare us with reputation alone. When their 30 ships arrive, we will destroy them in front of the Zilarians. Let the galaxy see what happens to anyone who opposes the Vorthak Empire." But in the deep archives of Zilara Prime, Elder Thane smiled for the first time in days. He had heard something in the human commander's voice that Krex Tar had missed. It was not fear or uncertainty. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a battle because his enemies never lived long enough to fight. The news traveled through the galaxy's communication networks faster than any starship. In trading posts and military bases, in diplomatic centers and mercenary bars, beings across 100 worlds heard the same whispered words. The humans were coming to Zilarian space. On the industrial world of Cantor VII, a hegemony military analyst named Zektar sat in his office surrounded by holographic displays. His job was to track military movements across the galaxy and predict where conflicts might spread. When the bulletin about human fleet deployment appeared on his screen, he immediately started pulling up old files. "Computer, show me all documented human military interventions for the past 50 years, he said. The data filled his office with glowing reports and tactical analyses. Zektar had studied every one of them, but reading them again always gave him chills. The pattern was always the same. Humans arrived, enemies surrendered, conflicts ended without major battles. But the details of how they did it were what kept military strategists across the galaxy awake at night. The Keth Moran incident was the most famous case. Slave traders had controlled the system for decades, selling beings from across the galaxy to the highest bidders. When the human fleet arrived, they did not demand surrender or threaten bombardment. They simply took positions around every slaver base and waited. The psychological pressure was incredible, Zektar read from a survivor's report. The human ships never moved, never communicated, never showed any emotion. But we all knew they were watching us. Every slaver in the system could feel those human eyes studying them, learning their weaknesses, planning their destruction. Within 6 hours, every slaver ship in the system had fled to hyperspace. The humans never fired a shot, but they freed over 10,000 prisoners without a single casualty. Then there was the siege of Proxima 7th, where human tactics had broken a 3-year blockade in less than a week. The besieging fleet thought they had the system locked down completely until human ships started appearing in impossible locations. Not attacking, just appearing. Behind the blockade fleet, inside their formation, right next to their command ships. They moved like ghosts, one of the blockade commanders had reported before his court-martial. We would scan empty space and find nothing. Then our proximity alarms would scream, and a human destroyer would be floating 50 meters from our bridge. They were always polite when they contacted us. Always professional. But we knew they could have destroyed us any time they wanted. The blockade had collapsed when half the fleet deserted rather than face human ships in actual combat. The other half surrendered when their commanders realized their crews were too terrified to fight effectively. Zektar pulled up another file. This one from his own government. The hegemony had tried to analyze human military doctrine for decades without success. Human ships were not the fastest or the most heavily armed in the galaxy. Their technology was good but not revolutionary. But somehow, they had ended more conflicts in 50 years than most empires managed in centuries. The key seems to be psychological warfare elevated to an art form, the report stated. Humans do not simply defeat their enemies. They make their enemies defeat themselves through fear, despair, and the terrible knowledge that resistance is useless. Across the galaxy on the trading station Deep Harbor, a Corvaxian merchant named Thrust clicked his mandibles nervously as he watched the news feeds. He had been at Proxima 7th during the siege, running supplies to both sides like most neutral traders. When the human fleet arrived, he had seen something that still gave him nightmares. "You don't understand," he told his drinking companion, a young Andromedan naval officer. "It wasn't what the humans did. It was what they didn't do. They could have ended that siege in minutes with overwhelming force. Instead, they made it last days. They let the enemy fleet realize slowly, piece by piece, how completely outmatched they were." The Andromedan officer laughed. "Come on, Thrust. They're just stories. Humans are mammals, like dozens of other species. Nothing special about them." Thrust's compound eyes focused on his companion with an intensity that stopped the laughter. "I watched human ships phase in and out of existence around battlecruisers. I saw crews of hardened military veterans abandon their posts rather than face humans in combat. I watched an entire fleet surrender to a force 1/10 their size without a single shot being fired." He leaned closer to the officer. "The stories are not exaggerations, young one. If anything, they don't tell you how truly terrifying humans can be when they decide you need to be stopped." Meanwhile, in Vorthak space, Overlord Krextar was receiving intelligence reports that his subordinates hoped he would read. His intelligence chief, Sub-Commander Vexnol, had compiled everything the Empire knew about human military capabilities. The file was much thicker than anyone expected. "Sir, the analysis shows a clear pattern in human conflicts," Vexnol explained to his superior. "They specialize in ending wars before they truly begin. Their reputation alone has prevented dozens of potential conflicts." Krextar barely glanced at the reports. "Fear tactics and propaganda, nothing more. The humans use their reputation because they cannot win actual battles. With respect, sir, the data suggests otherwise. In every documented case, human forces were outnumbered, but still achieved complete victory. They have never lost a military engagement. Because they only fight weaklings and cowards," Krextar snapped. "The Vorthak Empire is neither. When we crush their pathetic fleet at Zalarian space, the galaxy will see that human power is just an illusion." But even as he spoke, Krextar noticed that some of his bridge officers looked uncomfortable. The intelligence reports were detailed and specific. The tactical analyses were thorough and professional. And the conclusions were unanimous. Human military forces represented a threat level that the Vorthak Empire had never encountered before. In the depths of space, human ships were already moving toward Zalarian territory. Captain Jin So-jun stood on the bridge of his destroyer and reviewed the mission parameters one more time. 30 ships to face a Vorthak fleet of over 200 vessels. The numbers looked impossible to anyone who did not understand how humans fought wars. "Sir, We're receiving updates from galactic intelligence networks, his communications officer reported. Other military forces are evacuating the region. No one wants to get caught between us and the Vorthak. Jin nodded calmly. It was always the same when humans went to war. Other species understood instinctively that the area was about to become very dangerous, though not in the way most people expected. The danger was not from weapons or explosions. It was from the psychological pressure that human forces generated simply by existing in a combat zone. How long until we reach the Zilarian system? Jin asked. 18 hours, sir. Jin looked at his crew, all of them calm and professional. They had done this before. They knew their reputation preceded them across the galaxy, like a weapon more devastating than any missile or energy beam. In 18 hours, they would find out if the Vorthak Empire was smart enough to understand what that reputation meant. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zilarian system, like a collection of gray shadows materializing from the void. 30 ships arranged themselves in a perfect formation that looked almost ceremonial, as if they were arriving for a parade rather than a battle. But every sensor operator in the system knew better. Captain Jin Seojun stood on the bridge of his destroyer and studied the tactical display. The Vorthak fleet controlled the inner system, with 200 ships arranged around Zilara Prime like a metal noose. They had been bombing civilian targets for days, turning the beautiful world below into a landscape of fire and smoke. Status report, Jin said quietly. Lieutenant Park Min-jun checked his screens. Vorthak fleet maintains siege positions around the primary world. We count 212 combat vessels, mostly cruisers and battleships. They have not moved since our arrival. And the Zilarians? Approximately 3 million survivors on orbital stations and the planet's surface. The Vorthak have been systematic in their destruction of civilian infrastructure. Jin nodded and activated the fleet communication system. All ships. This is Admiral's Pride. Begin presence protocol. Standard formation. Full sensor sweep. Weapons powered, but locked. Broadcasting on all frequencies in 17 languages. The human fleet began to move with a precision that made other military forces across the galaxy nervous. Each ship knew exactly where to go and how fast to get there. They spread out across the system's edge like pieces on a chessboard, creating a formation that looked defensive but somehow managed to threaten everything within sensor range. On the Vorthak command ship, Overlord Krextar watched the human deployment with growing annoyance. Is that all? 30 little ships hiding at the system's edge? His tactical officer, Commander Nexval, studied his displays with more concern than his leader showed. Sir, their formation is unusual. They have positioned themselves to control all hyperspace exit points while maintaining optimal firing solutions on our fleet. Firing solutions with 30 ships against 200? Don't be ridiculous. But Nexval had been a military officer for 40 years, and he recognized tactical brilliance when he saw it. The human formation was not defensive. It was a trap waiting to be sprung. Every ship was positioned to maximize effectiveness while minimizing vulnerabilities. It was the kind of deployment that took years to perfect and decades to master. Sir, perhaps we should consider opening communications. Learn what they want before. I know what they want. Krextar interrupted. They want us to be afraid. Humans are famous for psychological tricks and fear tactics. But the Vorthak Empire does not frighten easily. At that moment, the human fleet began broadcasting on all frequencies. Jin's voice echoed across the system in 17 different languages. Calm and professional, as if he were reading a weather report. Attention Vorthak Fleet. This is Captain Jin Seojun of the Human Defense Force. You are currently engaged in unprovoked attacks on civilian targets. These attacks constitute acts of war against non-combatant populations. You have one opportunity to withdraw all forces from this system and return to your own territory. You have 1 hour to comply. Number 2. Krextar laughed loud enough for his entire bridge crew to hear. 1 hour? Listen to this arrogant mammal. He thinks 30 ships can dictate terms to the might of the Vorthak Empire. But his laughter died when he noticed that his bridge crew was not laughing with him. They were studying their sensor displays with growing concern, watching the human ships maneuver with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. "Sir," Nexval said carefully, "our intelligence reports suggest that human forces specialize in tactics we may not fully understand. Perhaps we should request reinforcements before." "We outnumber them 7-1, Krextar roared. "What reinforcements could we possibly need?" On the human flagship, Jin received updates from his sensor operators. The Vorthak fleet was maintaining position, but showing signs of confusion. Some ships had powered additional weapons systems, while others seemed to be running enhanced scans, trying to understand what 30 human ships thought they could accomplish against such overwhelming numbers. "Sir," Lieutenant Park reported, "we're detecting increased communications traffic within the Vorthak fleet. Multiple ship commanders are requesting clarification of orders." And Overlord Krextar's response? "He's ordering all ships to maintain siege positions and ignore our presence." Jin smiled slightly. Krextar was reacting exactly as human intelligence had predicted. The Vorthak leader was focused on numbers and raw firepower, completely missing the psychological warfare that had already begun. Every minute the human fleet remained in position without attacking was another minute for Vorthak crews to think about what those 30 ships might be capable of. "Begin Phase 2, Jin ordered. "Micro jumps to secondary positions. I want every Vorthak ship to know we can appear anywhere in this system, whenever we choose." The human fleet began to disappear and reappear around the Vorthak formation, like ghosts stepping in and out of reality. One moment a human destroyer would be at the system's edge. The next it would materialize beside a Vorthak battleship, scan it for 3 seconds, then vanish again. The jumps were too small for effective attack but perfect for psychological pressure. "What are they doing?" Nexval asked as his sensors tried to track ships that seemed to ignore the normal rules of space and time. "Playing games," Krextar said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Cheap tricks to make us nervous." "Sir, they're scanning our ships individually. Detailed sensor sweeps of our weapons, shields, crew complement. They're building a complete tactical database of our entire fleet." The implications hit everyone on the Vorthak bridge at the same time. The humans were not trying to intimidate them with random maneuvers. They were methodically gathering intelligence on every ship in the Vorthak fleet, learning weaknesses and vulnerabilities with the patience of scientists studying insects. "How are they moving like that?" a junior officer asked. "Our ships cannot make micro-jumps with that precision." Nexval checked his displays again. Human ships were appearing and disappearing throughout the Vorthak formation, always staying just long enough to complete their scans before vanishing to scan the next target. It was like watching a predator circle its prey, learning everything it needed to know before deciding how to kill. "Sir," the communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving reports from ship commanders throughout the fleet. Crew efficiency is dropping. Some officers are requesting permission to move to different positions." "Why?" "They say having human ships appear next to them without warning is affecting crew performance. Some of the bridge staff are showing signs of stress." Krextar turned to stare at his subordinate. "Stress? From 30 human ships that have not fired a single shot?" "Yes, sir. The uncertainty of when and where they will appear next is creating psychological pressure among our personnel." For the first time since the humans arrived, Krextar felt a chill run down his spine. His fleet had not even begun to fight. But somehow, the enemy was already inside their heads, making his crews doubt themselves and their ability to win. And they had 58 minutes left to think about it before the human ultimatum expired. In the deep space between fleets, human ships continued their deadly dance, appearing and disappearing like nightmares that could strike from any direction, at any time. And with every jump, every scan, every moment of calm professionalism, they planted the seeds of fear that would soon grow into panic throughout the Vorthak fleet. 23 minutes remained until the human ultimatum expired, and the Vorthak fleet was beginning to show cracks in its discipline. What had started as perfect siege formations was slowly becoming something that looked more like a nervous cluster of ships trying to protect each other from an enemy they could not predict or understand. Captain Jin stood on his bridge and watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The human fleet continued its methodical micro-jumps, appearing next to Vorthak ships long enough to complete detailed scans before vanishing into the darkness between stars. Each appearance was precisely calculated to maximize psychological pressure while gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities. "Report from the scanning teams," Lieutenant Park announced. "We have complete tactical profiles on 197 Vorthak vessels. Weapon configurations, shield frequencies, crew complement, even psychological profiles of their command staff based on their response patterns." "Excellent," Jin replied. "And the status of their fleet cohesion?" "Deteriorating steadily. We're intercepting increased communications between Vorthak commanders. Many are requesting new orders or permission to modify their positions. Some ship crews are reporting equipment malfunctions that our sensors show do not actually exist." Jin nodded. It was always the same pattern when humans engaged in psychological warfare. The enemy started seeing problems that were not there, hearing threats in normal background noise, interpreting routine scanner sweeps as targeting systems locking onto their ships. Fear made people create their own nightmares. On the Vorthak command vessel, Overlord Krextar was discovering that commanding a fleet under psychological attack was very different from commanding one in normal combat. His officers kept bringing him reports that made no sense, requests that seemed paranoid, and warnings about threats that their sensors could not confirm. "Sir, the cruiser Dark Vengeance reports targeting scanners from human ships," Commander Nexval said for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "Are they being targeted? Our sensors show no targeting beams, no weapon locks, no hostile action of any kind. But their crew insists they can feel human eyes watching them." Krextar slammed his fist on his command chair. "Feelings. We are the Vorthak Empire, not a collection of nervous children, afraid of shadows." But even as he spoke, Krextar found himself looking over his shoulder every few seconds. The human ships had appeared next to his command vessel 3 times in the past hour, each time close enough that he could see their hull details on his screen. They never stayed long enough for weapons to lock on, but long enough to remind him that they could be anywhere, anytime, without warning. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a priority message from Fleet Command." Krextar activated his private channel and listened to the recorded message from Vorthak High Command. When it ended, his face had turned several shades darker. "What did they want?" Nexval asked. "Intelligence reports from other systems. It seems the humans have ended 17 major conflicts in the past decade. In every case, enemy forces surrendered before significant fighting began. How is that possible with only 30 ships? According to intelligence, humans never use only 30 ships. They have some of the largest fleets in the galaxy. But they only send small forces to most conflicts because larger ones are not necessary." Nexval studied his displays again, trying to understand what his commander meant. "Sir, are you saying these 30 ships are not their entire response?" "I am saying these 30 ships are probably their smallest possible response. If we force them to fight, more will come. Many more." The implications hit the Vorthak bridge crew like a physical blow. If these 30 ships were just a screening force, how many more humans were waiting in nearby systems? How many fleets could appear if this small group decided they needed reinforcements? "Sir," the sensor operator called out. Human ship materializing directly ahead. A human destroyer had appeared less than 1,000 meters in front of the Vorthak command ship, close enough that they could see individual weapon ports and sensor arrays. The human vessel maintained perfect position relative to their movement, matching their speed and course as if the two ships were connected by invisible cables. Emergency maneuvers! Krextar shouted. Get that ship away from us! But before his helm officer could respond, the human destroyer transmitted a message on direct beam communication. Jin's voice filled the Vorthak bridge, calm and professional as always. Overlord Krextar. This is Captain Jin Sojun. I wanted to speak with you personally before my ultimatum expires. You have 11 minutes to begin withdrawal from this system. You dare threaten me directly? Krextar screamed at the communication pickup. I command 200 ships. You have 30. I have 30 ships here. Yes, Jin replied. But I think you misunderstood something important about human military doctrine. We do not send fleets to fight wars, Overlord. We send the smallest force necessary to end conflicts quickly and humanely. If this small force is not sufficient, we will send a larger one. How much larger? Nexval asked, before Krextar could stop him. Jin's voice carried the hint of a smile. Admiral Chen Wei-Ming is currently in hyperspace with the 2nd Human Defense Fleet. 140 ships, including 12 dreadnoughts, that have never been defeated in combat. They will arrive in 4 hours, if I request support. The Vorthak bridge fell silent except for the hum of electronic systems and the distant sound of crew members trying to control their breathing. 140 ships. 12 dreadnoughts. The numbers turned their overwhelming advantage into a minor skirmish that they could not possibly win. But I do not think Admiral Chen's fleet will be necessary, Jin continued. You are a professional military officer, Overlord Krextar. You understand numbers and tactical realities. Your ships are designed for planetary bombardment and siege warfare. Ours are designed for ship-to-ship combat against enemies who outnumber us. In a direct engagement, how many of your vessels do you think would survive the first 5 minutes? Krextar looked around his bridge and saw the answer in his officers' faces. None of them believed they could win a fight against human ships, even with their numerical advantage. They had spent the past hour watching 30 human vessels move through space like they owned it, appearing and disappearing at will, scanning Vorthak ships as if they were museum exhibits rather than military threats. You have 9 minutes to begin withdrawal, Jin said. If you choose to fight instead, I will destroy your fleet ship by ship until you surrender. I would prefer to avoid that outcome, but the choice is yours. The human destroyer vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the Vorthak command ship alone with a decision that would determine the fate of 200 ships and their crews. Sir, Nexval said quietly. What are your orders? 17. Krextar stared at the empty space where the human ship had been and tried to find the courage to order an attack. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear Jin's voice repeating the same terrible question. How many of your vessels do you think would survive the first 5 minutes? The answer, he realized with growing horror, was probably none of them. The moment came with 5 minutes remaining on the human ultimatum. Commander Nexval was watching his sensor displays when he saw the first Vorthak ship break formation. The light cruiser Swift Death suddenly changed course and headed toward the system's edge at maximum speed. Sir, Nexval reported with barely controlled panic. The Swift Death is withdrawing without orders. Overlord Krextar spun around in his command chair to stare at the tactical display. One of his ships was fleeing the battlefield before the battle had even begun. Contact Captain Zix Moore immediately. Order him to return to formation. Well. The communications officer tried several times before shaking his head. No response, sir. The Swift Death has shut down all communications and is heading for hyperspace. Then destroy him for cowardice. But before anyone could target the fleeing vessel, 3 more Vorthak ships abandoned their positions and followed Swift Death toward the system's edge. Then 5 more. Then an entire squadron of destroyers. Sir, we're receiving panicked communications from multiple ships, the communications officer reported. Crews are reporting system failures, navigation errors, orders that commanders never gave. Some captains are requesting immediate evacuation. Krextar watched in horror as his perfectly organized fleet began to fall apart like a structure made of sand. Ships were breaking formation in all directions, some heading for hyperspace, while others clustered together, as if seeking protection from invisible threats. In less than 10 minutes, the psychological pressure created by 30 human ships had destroyed the discipline of 200 Vorthak vessels. "This is impossible," Krextar whispered. "We outnumber them 7-1. Nexval was studying his displays with the desperate intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Sir, the human ships are not even targeting us. They are maintaining defensive positions and observing our fleet's dissolution." On the human flagship, Captain Jin watched the Vorthak fleet tear itself apart with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal sadness. He had seen this pattern many times before, but it never got easier to watch professional military personnel destroy their own careers through panic and fear. "Sir," Lieutenant Park reported, 47 Vorthak ships have fled to hyperspace. Another 62 are clustering around their command vessel in what appears to be a defensive formation. The remaining ships seem to be awaiting orders that their commanders cannot give. Jin nodded slowly. The psychological warfare phase was nearly complete. The Vorthak fleet had defeated itself, without the humans firing a single shot. Now came the most important part of the operation: ending the conflict with minimal loss of life and maximum preservation of military honor for the defeated enemy. "Open a channel to Overlord Krextar," Jin ordered. "It is time to offer him a way to save face." The main screen activated to show the interior of the Vorthak command ship. Krextar looked like a commander whose world had just fallen apart around him. Which was exactly what had happened. "Overlord," Jin said with respectful formality, "I can see that your fleet is experiencing difficulties maintaining formation under combat stress. This is not unusual when facing human forces. Would you like to discuss terms for an orderly withdrawal from this system?" Krextar's face went through several expressions before settling on bitter resignation. "Terms? You have destroyed my fleet without firing a shot. What terms could you possibly offer?" "Honorable withdrawal with full military courtesies," Jin replied immediately. "Your personnel fought bravely under impossible circumstances. There is no shame in recognizing when an enemy has superior tactical advantages." The words were carefully chosen to give Krextar something to salvage from the disaster. Jin had no desire to humiliate a professional officer who had simply been outmaneuvered by tactics he could not understand or counter. "What do you want in return?" Krextar asked. "Complete withdrawal of all Vorthak forces from Zalarian space. Reparations for civilian damages to be negotiated through normal diplomatic channels. A formal agreement that the Vorthak Empire will not return to this system for any military purpose." Krextar looked around his bridge at officers who had spent the past hour watching their fleet fall apart through psychological pressure alone. They all understood that fighting was no longer an option, if it ever had been. "Agreed," Krextar said quietly. "Thank you, Overlord. You and your crews showed courage by facing human forces in the first place. That will not be forgotten in our reports to Galactic Command authorities." The transmission ended, and Jin turned to his crew. "All ships, maintain positions until Vorthak withdrawal is complete. Begin preparations for humanitarian aid operations." Over the next 2 hours, the remaining Vorthak ships formed orderly columns and departed for hyperspace under human escort. There were no incidents, no last-minute attempts at violence, no desperate attacks by commanders who could not accept defeat. The withdrawal was as professional as the original invasion had been brutal. When the last Vorthak ship disappeared into hyperspace, Jin opened communications with the Zalarian survivors. Elder Thane's face appeared on the screen, tears streaming down his ancient features. "Captain Jin," Thane said, "how can we ever thank you? Our people are alive because of what you have done here." "No thanks necessary, Elder Thane. Protecting innocent people from aggression is what human forces do. We will remain in system until your infrastructure is rebuilt and your defenses are restored." The stories were true. Thane whispered. All of them. Humans really do end wars without fighting them. Jin smiled sadly. We fight plenty of wars, Elder. We just prefer to fight them in the minds of our enemies rather than in space, where innocent people can be hurt. Fear is a more precise weapon than any missile. Later, as human ships began coordinating relief efforts with Zalarian authorities, Jin stood alone on his bridge and wrote his mission report. Another conflict ended without casualties. Another potential war stopped before it could begin. Another victory achieved through reputation and psychological warfare rather than destructive force. But the weight of being feared throughout the galaxy was sometimes heavier than the weight of being loved. Humans had become peacekeepers through being too dangerous to fight, protectors through being too terrifying to oppose. It was effective, but it was also lonely. Sir, Lieutenant Park interrupted his thoughts. Admiral Chen sends his congratulations. The Second Fleet is returning to patrol duties. Jin nodded. Admiral Chen's fleet would not be needed here, just as it was rarely needed anywhere. 30 human ships had been sufficient to end a war before it truly began. In the years that followed, the Zalarian incident would join the list of human military legends that spread across the galaxy. Another story of overwhelming enemy forces surrendering without resistance. Another example of humans ending conflicts through the mere threat of their presence. And in the deep archives of Zalara Prime, Elder Thane would add his own account to the historical record. On this day, 30 human ships saved 3 million innocent lives without firing a single shot. They came when we had no hope left, fought a battle without weapons, and won a war without violence. This is what humans do when good people need protection from evil. They make the